We spoke about this, haven't we? We spoke about this the other day because it was interesting to me because obviously, you know, having you to speak to who knows a lot about running, it's interesting, you know, there's certain races that would suit certain individuals, and that could even not just be even track running, which, you know, every track is supposed to be the same. So obviously there'll be, you know, very slight differences in different tracks, but generally speaking, that should be about as even playing field as you can think of. So the different ways that races are ran, so whether someone goes hard from the start or whether it's kind of everybody's waiting for a fast finish, that affects how a different runner, you know, someone who might have a much worse PB than you, but is a much stronger finisher. If it's just a slow race and no one wants to take it from the front and then it gets to 400 meters and it's basically a sprint to the finish line, that guy who's probably got no right beating those guys that the race is really suited that individual runner, which I think is really interesting because, you know, everybody thinks about running and they think, oh, well, just the quickest person's going to win.
It's just not
other than the 100 meters, which is basically the quickest person's going to win. There's no real tactics in the 100 meters. You got to have a quick start. So if someone has a shit start that day, then there's no tactics in the 100 meters though. It's like, you can't be like, oh, I'm gonna sit on his shoulder.
Yeah, there's no tactic. There's no tactic, but there is technique, and there's tensing up and losing it. In the middle distance to long distance races, there is a huge element of tactic. So it's not the same as cycling in terms of how much like the wind,
how you take corners and stuff, and
it's the faster you go, the more that aerodynamics comes into play. So cycling, when they're going at like 60 kilometers an hour, something like that, it does make a massive difference if you're the next guy. The amount of energy that you need to use to sustain the same place drops massively. In athletics, there will be that to a certain extent, but a lot of it is more psychological. So if you're running at the front and other people are just on you and they're making their pace adjustments based on you, it's just so much easier to follow behind. That's why you don't get many. You do on occasion, but you don't get many people who just front run at a certain pace and win the race. Other people you're more likely to judge it slightly wrong, and the person behind you had to use a little bit less effort to just stay on you or make them mild adjustments, and then they've got something in the tank to just have a sprint finish. At the World Indoor Championships this weekend was a pretty good example of that, and there's no wind indoors, but as one of the Ethiopian guys, which name slips my mind at the minute, but has ran about 7 minutes 25 for 3K indoors this year, like one of the fastest ever 3K indoors. So people who don't know athletics as well would be thinking, well, if he just goes and runs 7:25 pace from the start, surely he's just going to run away from everybody and win. But if he did do that and very slightly overcooked it, the guys behind him would just be sitting off just enough to come. Yeah, but it's a long sustain to get that right over
it's
15 laps of a 200 meter track. Of a 200 meter track, sorry. So the guys who are sitting in and judging this effort of you, they just need to beat you. They don't need to worry about the pace. So because of that, and this happens all the time, the guy who's the fastest, whose strength is that he's faster than everybody else on paper in a really rapid race from the start, he doesn't want to be the guy setting the pace because he doesn't want to be the pacemaker for everybody else. So he leaves it because he's not quite sure. The longer he leaves it, the guys who have got a much better 1500 pedigree
the quick
are going, all right, well, thank you very much, because you haven't damaged me enough early on in this race to take the finish out of me. So the British guy, Josh Kerr, who's the world 1500 champion, it was handed to him on a plate. Like, the only way Josh was going to get beat was if it was either hard from the start, but even then, if it was hard from the start, he would have sat and hoped that these guys have slightly overcooked it and just come past them at the end. The way that Josh was going to win is if nobody wanted to take it on for long enough that they then couldn't do any damage, and it got to 3 or 4 laps to go, and there was no way that anybody could run away from him because he's just better than them at that, which is exactly what happened. So if the Ethiopian guy really, really wanted to test him, he needed to go from, 5, 6, 7 laps out and just get slightly quicker every lap. But when you do that, there's a risk, and it hurts. If you're trying to constantly accelerate, it hurts. And if you do it though, it makes it harder for the guys who are actually faster sprinters than you. They can't kick off that pace if it's constantly accelerating. They can only do it if the pace drops a little bit. They then feel okay and go for a surge, and then you can't match that surge. So it's the hardest way to do it, but sometimes they just feels like they haven't got the confidence, and then they try it too late, and it's done.
Because even if you took like a 1500 meter, and you had the best guys in the world and Usain Bolt, and they just jogged for 1400 and then just said, well, let's have a sprint finish, Usain Bolt would have a 1500 meter gold medal, because even though it wouldn't have been the fastest time ever, if they just jogged for the first 1400 meters and then were like, let's have a sprint finish, if they were all just kind of jogging.
Yeah, they would have to wait until like
100 meters.
Yeah, they would have to go very slow until then, because these guys at the 1500 meters, a lot of them can run like say 47, 48 for 400 anyway, which is they would just start running from a lot. They would start their build up from a lot further out.
Okay, here's a question then. 800 meter fastest person of all time. Who is it?
It is David Rudisha.
Okay. What distance would Usain Bolt beat him over? So like, would the four, because obviously 400 is like close to the middle.
Yeah, so Bolt as a kid was like world class at 400. So he was like 400, 200, and everybody sort of expected that he was going to be a 200, 400 runner like Michael Johnson. It was a shock in 2008 when he actually stepped down to do the 100 and then ran the world record out of the blue. Everybody was like, how has this happened? I thought it was a fluke, because it is uncommon for somebody so tall to be able to get such a good start. But he obviously just converted. But he is brilliant at so he's world class at 400, although he hasn't done that many. And he said that he did also do lots of 600 meter type reps in training. But Rudisha would, I would say, beat him at anything up, even 400's probably about the limit. So 400 could go either way. It would depend on if Bolt went out too hard and blew up. Whereas Rudisha would find it harder to go out too hard.
Yeah, because he's used to that distance.
Endurance guy, you would have that slight tendency to hold back. But if Rudisha's around 140, that meant he was going through in sub 50 through 400 to hang on to run that. So he's run 2 50-second 400s back to back. So
does Bolt slow down? Does Bolt slow down as 200 meters?
Yes, towards the end, but the second 100 is faster than the first, because the first 100 you've got to
start.
take exactly. You've got the flying start and you haven't got the bend, so the second 100's always faster.
Because they were saying Bolt was still doesn't slow down as 100 meters.
You maybe very slightly due to like tension or whatever, but really it should be. I think the 60 meter guys. I was watching the World Indoors at the weekend. I think it's around about 40 meters that they start to hit their peak.
Their peak.
So they can pretty much hold it 40 to 60. But yeah, in the 100 meters, it still does. You're talking fractions, but they do slightly dip off. But whereas the 200, you do have to still pace the 200 meters.
Yeah.
So that you don't tie up. But yeah, you definitely run faster in the second half, but it does become like a hold in your form thing.
I think it's the really interesting thing about running, and I think that, this was always something that interested people when you were running, and like people would speak about running and stuff, especially like my mates would go and do like a 5K and stuff. And then, with different sports, it's very difficult to say. Like when I'm speaking to my friend who's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, people know, there'll always be a thing in their mind where they're like, oh yeah, like they'll be good at that. But like in a street fight, anything can happen. Whereas really they can't. Like if we had Tyrone on, he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, you would just strangle you to death before you even knew where you were. Yeah, but there's always that thing in your head where it's like, there's an element of, because you don't know it that well. Whereas with running, it's like, my mates, what they would talk about, they'd see your times and they'd be like, right, I ran a 5K and I did it in, 1950 and I was really happy with that. And they'd be like, oh, what can Chris do it in? And then you'd tell them and they'd be like
13:54.
Yeah, cheers. But they would,
because it's only a few minutes off, you think?
No, it blows their mind. They're like, how on earth has he managed to do that? Like you can't tell like with running, it's like, oh, what? That is mental. Like that's, how on earth has he managed to run it that fast? And I think that's the good thing about running, that you can look at it and you can be like, yeah, what it takes to run 19 whatever. You just can't even fathom doing it in
in that time.
What you touched on earlier in that lockdown being really good for running is people were doing like the 5K challenge, or they've done parkrun. So most of the UK are aware of what the 5K PB is now, because they've done, I don't know how many people run a year, but it's something like around about 4 million people, I think, do a race every year. And Run Through have 250,000 unique runners a year now. So there's a lot of people run, and now people actually respect the 5K time that I've done, whereas actually growing up, I was always better at 1,500 meters. My 1,500 is still my strongest, but people they can't associate with that because they've got no idea what it means. I think maybe 40, 50 years ago, people knew what a mile was, so they could associate how fast somebody ran for a mile, because that was the thing that was more prevalent, like in the news. Or in this area, it was like, oh, well, if you've done the Great North Run, and I would have to say, well, I've done it now, but I would normally be saying no, and they'd be like, hey, you've been training for like 30 years and you've still not even managed to finish the Great North Run.
It's a touchy subject for me. Like,
I did it for fun, inverted commas, this year, because I'd been out of action for a bit. But I've done a proper half marathon once, which was 1:05. So,
how fun was the London Marathon, or was that the junior one?
Yeah, well, I did win the London
Mini
Marathon.
That was a casual 1:05.
That was
the
a long
London
time.
Mini Marathon. You can't tell people that.
Won the London Marathon, fact, mini, and the Junior North Run. Yeah, that was about the last 3 mile of the London Marathon.
3 miles, not that far, is it? I could do 3 miles.
Is the mini marathon, would that be the same distance?
No, it's the mini marathon's like the last 3 mile of the London Marathon. This is a long time ago.
Right.
They still go. It still goes.
They still talk about it.
Yes, I still talk about it. Yeah, they still talk. I'm still on the billboard.
It's like the Junior Great North Run.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like for younger people.
How old were you when done that?
16.
It's fair. I mean, I don't know why I'm even trying to compare.
Yeah,
like,
you got to qualify for, like, if you're not from London, you've got to qualify to run for your county to go and do it.
Yeah, well, I did the Great North Run, the previous one. I didn't want to say this on camera. My pregnant girlfriend beat us.
It was very tough conditions this year.
I'm not going to say it was a condition. Look, I had my first 5 miles was pretty good.
The downhill.
The downhill 5 mile, so and then I just gassed out. Mate, and started waiting.
Did you do it?
Like I can't even remember. I blocked it out. It's like 1 minute, 1 hour, 2 hours, 2 hours 20 or something.
That's bad.
2 hours 20.
Yeah,
really bad. I mean, in my defense, I hadn't eaten since the Friday, and I had about an hour's kip. But it's no excuse. I'm gonna have to do it again just to.
So this will bring us on there. So obviously you've been involved in athletics for ages, and then was it just a natural transition for you to be like, I want to work in this field? Because I've always said that you should try, like, because you've got such a good network in the athletics world. Obviously it's not like a massive like, you'll go places on holiday. I mean, Dad used to all the time go to places on holiday and like know someone from running.
Oh yeah, I know everybody. Wherever I go, there's always some running. There's always some people who are runners.
So it's quite a small community, like nationally. Obviously, so many people do it, but like at a higher level. But I would just, you've got a massive network in running. You've been competing at a serious level for how long?
Well, forever basically.
Yeah,
I mean, for nearly 40 years now because I'm 39.
Yeah.
Always been involved, and you're right. Like both sides of our family were from athletics. So, with my dad and grandpa on my mum's side, so everybody's in the family's been involved in athletics. I think one of the reasons why I never gravitated towards doing anything within athletics, like professionally as a job, is purely because of the amateur roots of the sport that I've always been involved in. So it is a very new thing for people to be advertising for paid coaching and stuff like that on social media and wherever, and some people are doing it really well. I'm not going to name any specifics because I wouldn't go there, but some there's some of my like people who I used to run with, for example, Lewis Moses is doing an absolutely phenomenal job with New Levels coaching, and he's got a group of elite runners because he's come from an elite international background, and then he's also got a more open training pool where he's doing personalized things. He's using people with really good running expertise, people who've actually been there and done it.
Yeah.
When I look on the internet in general, I look at some people who are like selling training programs, and I look at it and think like, well, what have you actually
achieved
done to be passing on these pearls of wisdom?
I think
so that I found that side hard. Yeah, so I'm taking a lot of what I've learned like as an athlete, and I have been lucky enough to sort of travel the UK, Europe, and further in the world with athletics, and I've like I'm cherry picking the best ideas that I had from there to try and bring them into the events in the UK in the Northeast. And one thing that I like, I know some people aren't used to like lapped races, but I've came from a track background, so I'm happy with lapping, but also, like you said, the cross country. So Newcastle Gateshead Marathon's a perfect example where I designed that course as it's a 3-lap course with some out and back sections, which some people in the comments afterwards might say, oh, could you not have done like a 1 lap so I got to see more things? But I'm thinking of it also from a spectating point of view. Well, yeah, some people would like to just have a change of scenery for like the whole time. But no, I understand the point. But I
put
think
some VR goggles on.
Is that in terms of the spectators
thing,
or the athletes?
Well,
athletes?
so I think so that would be from the athlete feedback. But I think from a spectator feedback as well, if you're going down to the quayside and you're crafty with it and you look at the map, if you're going down to watch somebody or like a few people within a very short distance, you can actually see them about 9 times. So if, say, the Great North Run London Marathon, you've got to pick a spot and everybody comes past and you see them once. But from that cross-country background, I'm used to looking at the course beforehand and going, right, okay, well, if I want to see these guys, it's a 3-lap race. If I'm crafty, I can go there. I can actually see them like 9 times, so you can see the race unfold. That like 9 times is your atmosphere. So like Newcastle 10K, we had the steel band on just down the road from the office here, and I put it at a place where you were going to pass it twice on 2 laps, so it actually meant we had 4 steel bands.
I was going to say, like, if you